Today's program made possible by patrons like you. Welcome to where we celebrate music from the movies. From the golden age to present day, we've got it all covered. We talk to those in the entertainment industry and find out about their favorite scores. You found the podcast, What's the Score? I'm your host, Frank R. Wilson. So sit back, relax, grab a popcorn, and let's see what we'll be hearing today. Recognize that music? It's a favorite of our guest today. Now, he's a returning guest who approached me with an intriguing idea for a show. Now, he's a journalist by profession. Today, he works on a blog called The Spy Command. His idea was to focus on the early career of composer Johnny Williams, as he was known then. So I hope you'll please join me in welcoming Bill Koenig to the program. Hi, Bill.
Hey, Frank. How's it going?
Good. And I really was excited about your idea. I'm starting to kind of look at individual composers and featuring them. We'll have an upcoming episode on Henry Mancini that you'll be able to hear soon. And I think also following that up with Johnny Williams, especially the early part of his career, which a lot of fans may not be familiar with. So I think this will be a really interesting show. Since you've been on the show before, I don't wish to repeat ourselves too much, but if you could just kind of let our audience know a little bit about yourself, your background and growing up in family life, and then we'll kind of get into the music part of it. But let us know a little bit about yourself.
Well, I grew up in the college town of Bloomington, Indiana. I've been an enthusiast of spy-related things, but also 1960s adventure shows. I mean, these were big parts of my childhood, and it's I've always been attracted to soundtracks. The very first soundtrack I purchased was "Diamonds Are Forever" in 1971. I still have it. The sleeve's kind of beaten up, but
I bet.
Yeah,
and you talk about how you liked things in the early days from your childhood and whatnot. One of the things, if for those of you that maybe aren't aware, because Bill and I are quote Facebook friends, one of the things I love that Bill posts on Facebook a lot of times are these old TV episodes that he seems to find deep in the bowels of YouTube. YouTube's amazing. And so I really appreciate you kind of sharing those, because sometimes I'll take a look at them and it really takes me back. Anyway, thanks for kind of sharing that. And again, are you a recovering journalist, or are you still actively working as a journalist?
I'm still active for now.
Okay.
Put it that way.
That's fine. Yeah. And of course, then I mentioned the blog, and we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the show. Concerning Johnny then, tell us a little bit about his start. The very start of his career. How was it that he got started? Can you kind of share a little bit about what you know about that?
Well, I know he was born in New York. At some point in the 50s, he moved out to L.A., and he was able to get employment as a musician. And for example, in the original 1958 recording of the Peter Gunn theme by Henry Mancini, Williams is playing the piano.
Huh.
And in fact, it's funny because 20 years later, when John Williams received the Oscar for scoring Star Wars, Henry Mancini was one of the presenters. It was Henry Mancini, Johnny Green, and Olivia Newton-John presenting it. And that year, actually, John Williams was actually nominated for 2 scores. So he represented 2 of the 5 nominees.
Wow.
And anyway, Williams won it, and he had already won Oscars prior to this, but Star Wars helped him transcend. He became familiar to general audiences after Star Wars, but you could tell there was an affection between Mancini and Williams. When Williams came up to get the Oscar, and and I'm told, but it's like I haven't verified this, that even though in 1961, even though Williams was now scoring a lot of TV episodes, that he played piano on Breakfast at Tiffany's. So like he's still doing a little work,
little studio work. Yeah.
Yeah. But clearly there was an affection between the 2 guys, and it must have been a great moment for the 2 of them. Mancini giving him the Oscar and Williams receiving it.
I bet. And of course and I still want to focus on the early days, but I have to mention, because and since you mentioned it, there's a lot of people that credit Star Wars and the score to Star Wars as kind of being a renaissance of a film music collection, I guess, if you will, or people buying film music.
Yeah.
It all of a sudden became cool to buy, records like that again. So, I mean, the film music industry owes a lot to him, if for no other reason, just for that.
And I remember that original Star Wars vinyl issue, because there were 2 discs.
2, I know. Jeez.
Yeah, that was pretty rare in those days to get 2 discs. Usually it was like 1 disc, about 40 minutes, and that was it. So that was very much. And I believe it might have been 2 discs a year later when Williams' score for Superman came out.
I think you're right. Right. So. Well, you mentioned Peter Gunn, where Johnny played on the piano. Why don't we have a listen to that? Tell us a little bit about why you wanted to choose that amongst some of his early works.
Well, simply because it shows you, he was in demand as a musician, and also for Mancini, Peter Gunn, I'm pretty sure, was his first big hit. That really put him on the map. He had done some stuff before that, but once Peter Gunn came out, he was on a roll. So
yeah, and I would guess in those days too, it was kind of unusual for a TV theme to be a quote hit unquote.
Yeah, and because they then came out with an album of Peter Gunn music. Now, I think technically it may not be original soundtrack. I think the Peter Gunn theme is a little longer, for example, at the beginning of the album. But but it was a big seller, and again, it made Mancini really popular, and John Williams was part of it.
Well, let's have a listen for ourselves. This will, for some of us, bring back some great memories. This is an iconic piece of music. This is the theme from Peter Gunn, and it features Johnny Williams on the piano. Let's have a listen. Okay, I mean, I'm going to ask this question, but I don't want you to take it the wrong way.
Sure.
What qualifies you to be kind of an expert on Johnny Williams' early career?
Well, I don't consider myself an expert. I'll just put it this way. It's something that I've made a point of kind of taking in, and I take note of when I see it. One thing that got me interested, there were like two debates years apart. One was on, the message board of a James Bond website, and the other was on Facebook. And in both cases, somebody posed the question, what would have happened if John Williams had done the early Bond films instead of John Barry? Now, I'm a big admirer of John Barry's work on the Bond films, but there were some responses that I thought were a little off kilter. And people were saying, well, I find Star Wars bombastic. And I tried to kind of reply that, well, first of all, Star Wars was like 15 years after the first James Bond film. And number one, and two, composers' styles vary, they evolve over time. And three, composers do the music they do is what they think the work requires. And the reason John Williams did what he did for Star Wars was that's what he thought the material called for. But I tried to make the point, if you really want to explore that thing, that issue, you should look at what John Williams was doing in the late 50s, early 60s, to get an idea of what he might have been able to do, for Bond films. And I know recently Williams, of course, he turned 90 earlier this year. He did say, well, yeah, sure, I might want to do a James Bond movie at some point. And anyway, I just know from my own listening, Williams was pretty versatile he's been very versatile throughout his entire career.
Yeah.
And there is stuff there in that early 60s period when he was billed as Johnny Williams that people would have no idea that he did it. And a lot of it's like really great. And he's doing it on a TV schedule with TV resources, a lot fewer, no 80-piece orchestra here.
Yeah.
But it sounds still great. So
it does. And I think that, because of the cues that you've chosen to play today, you're going to hear that versatility, which is again, shows the talent of the man. And you just mentioned it. I love it. At age 90. Yeah, sure. I'd like to do a Bond film.
Yeah.
He's amazing. I got to tip my hat to him. It's amazing at age 90. Yeah. Not only is he still composing, but he's still performing. He's still conducting in front of an audience. I mean, that's
and
amazing.
I guess he's still working on this 5th Indiana Jones movie, and he said it might be the last one, but because he said at my age, a movie soundtrack is like a 6-month investment of time. I'm like, that's a pretty major investment for me to make right now. But and again, I'm not criticizing John Barry whatsoever. I'm a great,
I know,
but but to say, well, Star Wars is kind of bombastic, it's like, you really ought to learn more about the early Johnny Williams.
I'm not sure I can consider that an accurate comment. And by the way, you know better than to criticize John Barry in front of me, so I don't take offense to what you're saying. I understand.
Yeah.
Well, one of the cues that you chose was from an early TV series that he worked on. It's called M Squad.
Yes.
And the cue you chose was called The Chase. Can you tell us a little bit about that cue and why you wanted to include that to listen to today?
Well, M Squad was John Williams's first scoring assignment. And,
wow.
And M Squad, it was a half-hour police drama that starred Lee Marvin. It had a pretty snappy theme by Count Basie. And it was made at that time, it was called Revue, REVUE, which was part of MCA, which had been a talent agency that wanted to get into TV production. It eventually took over Universal and then took on the Universal name. But in any case, the guy who hired John or Johnny Williams was a guy named Stanley Wilson. He ran the TV music operation at Review, and he did the occasional score himself, but a lot of what he did was like hire composers, and the deadlines were tight, and so he was the first person to hire John Williams to do a score. And you might say, well, how smart do you have to be to hire John Williams? Well, in the late 50s, well, no one had hired him to do a score, so I guess that made him pretty smart. And there were other. He recruited the likes of Jerry Goldsmith to work on a show called Thriller. A guy named Morton Stevens, he hired him for his first scoring. Now, Morton Stevens isn't that well known, but he wrote the theme to Hawaii Five-0 and did a lot of television work over the years. And he recruited Quincy Jones to work on the pilot for Ironside and in early episodes. So so Stanley Wilson's he's one of these forgotten people. Although my understanding is there is like a little street on the Universal lot named after him. But anyway, I just wanted to give him a shout out because, again, he helped set John Williams on this path to where he's now so renowned.
Yeah, he deserves a lot of credit then. I mean, and you mentioned, and I've heard the stories, you mentioned the tight timelines in those days for TV shows. I mean, sometimes I'm just amazed. I would hear these stories. In fact, I think it was with Goldsmith where he worked on a weekly show that was live, and they would play the music live, and it was like a half hour or hour drama, and he'd have to write all this music within, just a few days, and they would rehearse for a day and then have to play it live. I mean, it was amazing with the output these guys had and the pressure they must have been under.
And in the case of a show like M Squad or some of these we'll be talking about, he might get the assignment on a Thursday or Friday and have to have it in by Monday or Tuesday. Yeah. It's just like, so yeah, very tight, because, first of all, they made a lot more episodes in those days. I mean, they might make like 39 episodes in a season.
Well, that's right. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it had to be tight. So anyway, but,
let's have a listen. This is, again, from the TV show called M Squad, and the cue is called The Chase, and it's written by, and it's the first effort of a scoring assignment, written by composer Johnny Williams. I don't know if you know the background on this or not, but I'd be curious if you do. What was it you think that led to the changing of the name from Johnny to John. I want to say the first film he worked on where he wrote under John Williams was The Cowboys. I could be wrong, but what led to that? Do you know? I mean, I realize Johnny kind of sounds a little immature or whatever, but I mean, was there some kind of a hidden reason that we don't know about as to why he changed the name?
I have to admit, I don't know. Actually, with his very first credit, he was John T. Williams, and then he went to Johnny within a year, because there was another review show called Johnny Staccato that featured music by Elmer Bernstein, another great composer. And the format was John Cassavetes was the star. He had been a musician, but he ended up becoming a detective. But instead of having an office, he hung out at a jazz club where he would play with the boys. And that's where he took his calls. So in the very first episode of Johnny Staccato, John Cassavetes is on the piano, and they have this very dramatic introduction of all the jazz, of all the players. And then, the owner of the club motions Johnny Staccato, you got to call. And so John Cassavetes then motions to a guy you can't see, and then, to take over for him on the piano. And, this guy comes over and they play together for a second, then Johnny Staccato leaves. Well, that guy is Johnny Williams. And, and I did not know that, because when I'm watching it, first of all, the shots, it's kind of a long shot for one thing, but he's got hair, he's clean shaven.
Yeah. So let me make sure I understand this right. You're saying he appeared on camera?
He appeared on camera. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He appears on camera, but I didn't know this until the end titles, when it identified all the musicians, and the last one, Johnny Williams, piano player. And he was, now a friend of mine has told me, I've seen the movie, but I wasn't watching for this. There's also a comedy from 1959, a movie called Bell, Book and Candle, had James Stewart, Kim Novak, Jack Lemmon. It's a comedy, involves witches and witchcraft. And so there was a scene at some place called the Zodiac Club, and there's a piano player, and apparently that's John Williams as well, but uncredited, but I just heard about that this past week, in fact, before this recording. So yeah, he would, but definitely on Johnny Staccato, because he is credited, he's on camera, and yeah.
I wonder if he has a SAG card.
That's a good question.
One of the other cues that you chose was, I believe, the TV. I'm not familiar with it, but the TV show was called Checkmate.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about why you wanted to choose that amongst your favorites of his early work.
Well, this may be his first theme music, because again, with M Squad, Count Basie had done the theme.
Okay.
But he definitely did the theme, and he did score at least some episodes. And again, it's, a show made it review. And again, he would have gotten the work through Stanley Wilson. The format of Checkmate was, you had two dashing detectives played by Anthony George and Doug McClure, and they were helped by a criminology professor played by Sebastian Cabot. Anyway, the theme, which is what I picked, it's very striking. And again, I mean, at this point, John Williams would have turned 30, and he is, but yeah, you can tell he's a talented guy. Just with this music.
Yeah, I found, again, I probably wouldn't have known it was him when I first heard it, but then when I knew it was him and I heard it, it's like, oh yeah, okay, yep, I hear it. So there's several examples here we're playing today that demonstrate that there is a style that he has that seems to come through. Let's have a listen to this. And this is the theme, I take it?
Yes, it's the main theme music.
Okay, the main theme, which was, I guess, the first TV theme that Johnny was able to compose. It's from the TV show called Checkmate. Let's have a listen. one of the, I guess I can't call it a cue, but one of the links that you sent me that has samples of some of his early work brought back really great memories that came flooding back. Because I'm, ashamed to admit it, but I'm old enough to remember some early TV shows in the 60s, I guess, if you will. The one that stands out in my mind is Lost in Space. I mean, I could hear it in my head before I started playing it. And I'd forgotten, which we're going to be able to play for you, that actually he had written 2 different themes for it, I believe. So
that's right. He did 2 different themes for Lost in Space, and he did 2 different themes for Land of the Giants. These are all Irwin Allen shows. Actually, with Land of the Giants, he transitioned from Johnny to John. But
okay.
But because
tell us a little bit about why you, man. And this is actually kind of unique. It's a rather long cut that we're going to play for you, but it features several TV themes. Kind of let our audience know about what those themes are and why you wanted to include that today.
Well, starting with Lost in Space, but also extending through, I'm trying to remember the titles now, The Time Tunnel,
right,
and Land of the Giants. Williams had been hired by producer Irwin Allen, who in the 60s was doing these science fiction-oriented adventure shows. And that relationship would pay off for Williams' later career, because when Irwin Allen started doing these big disaster movies, the Poseidon Adventure and the Towering Inferno,
right,
he hired John Williams to do the scores. And, so my contention is that the relationship between John Williams and Irwin Allen was, very much helped Williams' career as a result. What this cut is, it's a medley essentially of the themes, because you have like the main title and then the end title music.
Right.
The end title being shorter than the main title. But again, they're very distinctive, and you listen to these, and of course it's John Williams, but again, he wasn't famous then, so.
And what do you think? It's interesting because there's only 2 relationships I can think of. Obviously, John Williams had a very special relationship, or has a special relationship, with Steven Spielberg.
Right.
And then, of course, now you bring up the one with Irwin Allen. What do you think is behind that? Why is it that he tends to gravitate to working with the same people all the time, unlike, quite frankly, a lot of other composers that seem to float around all kinds of different directors and producers?
Well, again, this is just an educated guess, but I assume he must have enjoyed working with Irwin Allen. If he didn't, I don't think he would have come back. I mean, that's human nature. And from Allen's perspective, I can absolutely understand it. Like, he had done, he had provided great work, and okay, I'm going big now with Poseidon Adventure. I need someone I can depend on, so I'll bring John back. I mean that's my guess as to how it played out.
Sure. And because it is interesting, I'm assuming you would agree with me that it is interesting how music can elevate a project. I mean, it can't necessarily destroy it or make it worse, but it certainly can elevate it and make it better. And I suspect maybe that's what he saw evidence of what John Williams was able to contribute to his projects.
Right. And as a very quick aside, I think one reason why I remember some of these things from the 60s so fondly is because of the music. Because in the early to mid 60s, on weekly episodic television, you had John Williams, you had Lalo Schifrin, you had Jerry Goldsmith. Now, Goldsmith was also doing movies at that time, but, he was still doing TV work.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of great talent, contributing to this. And I suspect the scores they provided did in fact elevate the material.
Yeah. Well, let's have a listen to this again. This is kind of a medley of several different TV themes, as Bill had mentioned, both main themes and end title themes. It's a little bit of a long queue, but I think it's worth it because it's fabulous music. We're talking about music from Lost in Space, The Time Tunnel, and Land of Giants, all of them written by a composer known at that time as Johnny Williams. Let's have a listen. We'll get back to our program in a minute. This program is done for the love of film and film music, plain and simple. However, it does take a huge investment in time and in fees for me to make the program work for you. I don't sell commercial time and don't really want to on this program. Rather, I'm kind of like a public broadcasting station. I need support from listeners like you. For as little as $3 a month, you can help me offset the time spent in putting the program together. Or maybe you just think of it as leaving a tip in the tip jar. Either way, if you can join up, there will be bonuses, like an additional 10 to 15 minute segment with our guest every week. Well, we'll play additional cues as well as ask some extra questions. And it's going to be only available to patrons. How do you sign up? Well, it's simple. You go to patreon.com/what's the score, and that's all one word. That's Patreon, that's patreon.com/what's the score. Check it out. We'd be grateful for your support. That's patreon.com. He did go through a transition where he was almost exclusively working on TV, but there was a point where he transitioned, to film. I don't think I don't know. You can help me understand this. I don't know if he flat out left TV and went to film, or if he did a combo for a while and then stayed exclusively on film or not. But tell me a little bit about what your understanding or your memory is about his transition from working on TV to working on film scores.
Well, one of his first film scores is a little bit accidental. It was something called The Killers from 1964. And it was intended to be the first made-for-TV movie. However, it was made at Universal. Mm-hmm. And so again, getting hired by Stanley Wilson. But what happened was The Killers was deemed to be too violent for TV. And so it got a theatrical release instead. And it's got a great cast. Lee Marvin again. Lee Marvin, Clu Gulager, who passed away recently, Angie Dickinson, John Cassavetes, and in his final film appearance, Ronald Reagan.
I was waiting for that. Yep.
Yeah. Because Reagan mostly played likable characters. In this case, he was the villain who had actually hired the hitmen. The plot basically is, these two hitmen go and take out this guy, and he's a teacher at a blind school. And the guy doesn't try to flee. He gets his students out, but then he just sits there and he takes it when, they pump him full of shots. And then the killers begin to wonder, well, why did he do that? Why didn't he try to go? And they decide there's more to this. We were offered a lot more money than we should have been offered. So it becomes this thing, and it was a remake of a 1946 film with Burt Lancaster, among others. Anyway, so John Williams is doing the music for it, and it becomes a film score instead of a TV score. So that I can't get. I haven't had a chance to look it up, so I can't guarantee that's his very first film score, but it's got to be one of the first. And again, it's kind of by accident. And he was starting, I do know by the late 60s, he was starting to transition. He was certainly pretty much into film only by the early 70s. And it's kind of an eclectic group of scores. It was, there was like 73 was The Long Goodbye, which was this very quirky Robert Altman directed Philip Marlowe movie with Elliot Gould. He did the Sugarland Express, which was his first collaboration with Spielberg.
Right.
I think that was 74 maybe. which led to Jaws in 75.
Yeah. And the Cowboys, what, in 72, I think it was?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
And when was the Reavers? Because I remember that one too.
I have to look it up, but that's the Reavers. I think CBS was actually involved with movies at the time, but it was under a different brand name. It was like General Cinema Corporation.
Oh, okay.
Why they did that instead of just calling it CBS Films, I don't know. But that, I think, was one of his early films as well.
For some reason, I have a memory of, I think my mom took me to see the Reavers, and I was pretty young, and I want to say it was I don't even remember the film that much anymore. I need to revisit it, but I think it was a little bit risque for a young kid.
Yeah.
And I remember going, wow, look at this. So, but I distinctly remember some of the music he did for that. So,
well, it's funny because where John Williams really, we ended up at my home, we ended up actually getting the soundtrack to the Towering Inferno.
Yeah.
But where Williams' name really leapt out to me was Jaws in 75.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember thinking as I was watching it, because of the similarities between like the main Jaws theme and the main Psycho theme from that movie, I was thinking, if Hitchcock does another movie, he ought to hire this John Williams guy. And then he did for his final film.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know we're focusing on the early career, but I've got to bring it up, and I'm sure you remember this. I'm sure you've seen the film. It was like part of a documentary, I think, is something. But apparently, when Williams was working on Jaws, he had Spielberg come over to his house, and he said, "Let me play you the main theme on the piano." And he goes, "Dun dun 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 dun," and Steven Spielberg says, "What? That's it?" But when you hear it with the orchestra and whatnot, wow, pretty powerful.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I just laughed when I saw that. It was great. Well, we'll go back to The Killers, which is a film that you mentioned, quite possibly the very first film that Johnny Williams worked on. I'm assuming this is the main theme, probably.
Yes. Yeah.
Or actually, I think it's almost a medley of the theme and some bits from the score, if I remember.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Anyway, this is from the film called The Killers, written again by our featured composer today, Johnny Williams. Let's have a listen. One of the last cues that we wanted to play today was from a show that was called Craft Suspense Theater. Sounds daunting, doesn't it? I'd be curious, what led you to want to choose that amongst some of the ones some of the cues you wanted to highlight from his early career?
Well, a few years ago, I stumbled on this on YouTube. It was a copy of the original broadcast of an episode called Once Upon a Deadly Night, I think, and it involves authorities trying to track down a psychotic killer who's been nicknamed Georgie Porgy. And it's got a cast of character actors, no real stars. The most recognizable person is Ted Knight, is a small role.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, but it was directed by Robert Altman, and it's very intense. And in addition to the Craft Suspense Theater theme he scored that particular episode as well. Again, very intense. You might find it in YouTube under that name, or you might find it under something called Nightmare in Chicago, which appears to be like an expanded version that maybe got released overseas internationally.
Okay.
But again, Williams scored it. Yeah, in the middle of this manhunt, the U.S. military decides to also be transporting a missile through the Chicago area. So it's like everything's, very intense.
Yeah.
Story, and really does give Williams a chance to shine. And just but watching the version of the original broadcast is weird. It's a black and white copy of a color original. And so you're watching it, and then oh no, time for a commercial from Kraft. Here's a recipe from Kraft. Oh, yeah. back to the hunt for the psychotic killer.
But YouTube is just a treasure trove. I'm just amazed at what you can find on there.
Yeah, the one problem with YouTube is, of course, sometimes the studios then have stuff yanked. We really do need some kind of firm repository where we know it's going to stay and be accessible. But in any case, again, this is probably, I don't know the exact year. We're probably talking about 63, 64, somewhere in there. But again, I mean, Johnny Williams, I mean, his talent is evident. And that theme is we're going to play is really intense. It's kind of, you can tell you're not going to be relaxed after listening to it.
Yeah, well, let's judge for ourselves. This is again the main theme from a television show called Craft Suspense Theater, written by composer Johnny Williams. Well, as we kind of wrap things up, Bill, I mentioned that you, while you're still an active journalist, but you also of interest to some of our listeners, I'm sure they might be interested in the blog that you write for called the Spy Command. Can you tell us a little bit about that blog and how people can find you on the internet for that?
Sure. The URL is hmssweblog.wordpress.com because the Spy Command is not the original name of the blog. It's primarily about spy-related entertainment, although I occasionally stretch it beyond that. Things are a little slow right now. No James Bond movie in production.
And probably won't be for a while, actually.
Yeah, and we got to wait till next year for the next Mission Impossible movie. But that's the focus of the blog. One quick thing: there is the post I did, and just as we record this, it was earlier this week. One of the posts I actually enjoyed the most recently was I had a chance to interview an author named John Crampner. He's done a biography of the screenwriter Ernest Lehman. I kept my questions primarily to Lehman's spy work, which in North by Northwest, one of the greatest spy movies of all time.
Right.
But I find Lehman a fascinating character, and I know I kind of met John via Twitter, and he was, he tweets under the handle Ernest Lehman Bio. He started like tweeting out bits of interesting research he had come across, and so I said, "Listen, when you're ready to publish, let me know. I'd like to interview about North by Northwest and his other spy stuff."
Yeah.
So that ran here recently, and I just had a real kick working on that. It was because it was different, and um, because right now with Bond related stuff, there's a lot of baggage, because when are they going to do one, and et cetera, et cetera. So anyway,
Yeah. Well, so in other words, if you wouldn't mind repeating that web address again so they can check out your blog. And by the way, I think the HMSS stands for
Her Majesty's Secret Servant.
That's what I figured. Okay.
That
Well,
was,
anyway, if you wouldn't mind repeating the URL.
yes, the URL hmssweblog.wordpress.com.
Excellent. And listen, if you're not already tuned into this or subscribed to it, I highly encourage you to do it. Bill's a highly talented writer, and he's really interested. He's really written a lot of interesting blogs, not just about James Bond, but all sorts of different topics. And in fact, one of the things I find interesting, and I had no idea we had a mutual friend. I know you've been publishing sometimes rarities in scripts that have, for the Bond films that maybe things that got left out of the final product. And you and I apparently both know Gary Ferruta, and
Yes.
I know Gary has a lot of that unique stuff. So, I mean, I think it's been really neat you've been able to share some of that stuff. It's kind of interesting to see what the first draft or earlier drafts of a script were and what finally ended up making it to the screen.
Well, even late drafts have stuff that gets dropped out.
Yeah.
For example, I have a copy of something that's it's listed as being supposedly the shooting draft of Live and Let Die, but it's way different, and the ending in particular is different. In fact, the ending of what I have really evokes the ending of North by Northwest. There's no Baron Samedi on the train, so I'm guessing they must have come up with that idea during filming, I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe so. Well, anyway, please do check out his blog. I highly encourage you to do that. And Bill, look, I can't thank you enough. I thought you had a brilliant idea to talk about one of our more iconic composers, but to focus more on the early part of his career that perhaps many of his fans aren't as familiar with. So I think we're going to have a lot of listeners that really benefit from learning more about the early days of John Williams' career. And again, thank you for the idea and sharing some of this music with us.
Well, thanks, Frank. I had a great time. So thanks for having me.
Oh, no, my pleasure. So with that, I just want to remind all our listeners that if you're one of our patrons, we're going to have a bonus episode with Bill here in a minute, and you're going to have a very interesting piece of music to listen to, but it's only available to patrons. Now, if you're not a patron, you probably heard the ad in the middle of the broadcast that gives you the information about how to join up. I would be grateful for your support. I truly would be. And I think this bonus episode is going to be worth it if you're a John Williams fan in particular. So anyway, with that, again, our thanks to Bill for joining us on this podcast today. And I guess there's only one thing left to say, and that's simply this. My name is Frank R. Wilson. My time's up, and I thank you for yours. Thanks for joining us on What's the Score? Can you hear anything in the background?
No.
Good.
All I could hear is your voice.
Okay, good. Because he's operating an air compressor at the moment next door. So, okay.
Okay. No,
I'm just going to be really brief, and it's very informal. I'll just say, what was the other cue you wanted to tell us about? And you just kind of tell us, and then we'll introduce it, and then we'll go from there. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay. Hang on a sec. Welcome to our patrons, back for the bonus segment with our guest, Bill Koenig. He told me as we were preparing for this about another cue that he wanted to play that I thought, wow, this is kind of interesting. We need to hear this, and we need to hear the story behind it. So, Bill, why don't you let our patrons know about this unique cue that you wanted to share with us?
Well, by the fall of 1966, TV producer William Dozier was riding pretty high because, he had Batman that came in the middle of the 65-66 season. So in the fall, he's got Batman for a second season. He's got the Green Hornet, and he had a situation comedy called The Tammy Grimes Show.
Yeah.
Well, the latter didn't do very well. It got yanked. I think the network was ABC after 4 episodes. But the theme music for the Tammy Grimes Show was done by Johnny Williams. And for those who listened to the earlier big episode, I mentioned about how some people feel like, John Williams would have been terrible as a composer for early James Bond movies because Star Wars is so bombastic, et cetera, et cetera. Listening to the theme of the Tammy Grimes Show, this is the most unlike John Williams thing ever.
Oh, wow.
And because judge for yourself, but it's very light. Again, he's writing to the material. Now, on YouTube, I have found 2 things. One, just the main theme, and then one complete episode. And so it was not till I saw the end of that complete episode that I saw the John Williams credit. And also remember, he also did some episodes of Gilligan's Island, at least in the first season.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So he, again, he produced music, based on what he thought the material called for.
Demanded what it needed. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, now I'm really curious. I can't wait to hear this. Perhaps I need to check out the episode. Was the show any good?
I
think that answered my question. Okay.
The concept was that Tammy Grimes played a kind of spoiled young woman who went to work for one of her relatives' bank, and she gets into all sorts of mischief and stuff.
Oh, that Tammy. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It got yanked after 4 episodes. So obviously it didn't resonate with the audience. So,
yeah. Well, let's have a listen. This is again, a theme written by Johnny Williams, for the show called The Tammy Grimes Show. Let's hear this and see what you think. Bill, thanks again, especially for sharing that special nugget with our patrons. I really do appreciate it. That was fascinating backstory, and it was kind of interesting to hear that piece of music. So my thanks again to you.
Well, thanks again, Frank. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. And thanks again to our patrons for your support. I can't thank you enough. And we'll look forward to talking to you next time. And with that, be well, take care. Bye-bye. All righty, and we are out.